1500 to 1533, the early 16th century. The flute was about to enjoy a flourishing culture in all of Europe. It was the beginning of the 16th century. The first major musical event of the century came in 1511. Sebastian Verdung wrote Musica Guttusche, and it became the first printed treatise on music. In his treatise, he includes instructions on how to play from a tablature. A tablature is when a composer writes the actual fingerings for the instrument. Both fifes and recorders are mentioned in Verdung's treatise, but not the consort flutes. The consort flutes of the 16th century were made in 3 different sizes, and the most common way of performing them was with ensembles of a bass flute and 3 tenor or alto flutes. Some courts in Europe had inventory, sometimes consisting of hundreds of flutes. Surviving flute music from the 1510s and 1520s are the very earliest pieces that we still have today. The very first one was called, "In this booklet you will find 75 pretty songs with discant, alto, bass, and tenor parts for joyful singing. Also some that can be artfully played on recorders, flutes, and other musical instruments." The flute was a part of the Swiss cantons culture during this time, like we were discussing in the video before. It continued to also be used widely as a folk instrument in that region. Originally written in 1529 but revised in 1545, Martin Agricola wrote his treatise Musica Instrumentalis Deutsch. In the revision, he includes the Swiss fife and transverse flute, even touching on 4-part consorts. Agricola also talks about articulation syllables, including flutter tonguing. Agricola also mentioned about playing in the Swiss manner. If you want to master the fundamentals and basics, then learn to play with quivering breath, for it graces the music very much on all wind instruments that one plays. This is some of the first sort of evidence of a type of vibrato. Agricola was in favor of getting rid of the tablatures and telling musicians of that time to read musical notation. We often see flutists depicted in 16th century art playing flutes 2 to 3 feet long with 7 or 8 finger holes in a military setting. But according to written sources, these military fifes were different than the consort flutes. It should be noted that soldier fifers perhaps played also on consort-type flutes. The military music from this time was unwritten, so we really have little to go by on what they actually played. In 1512, in Lyon, we find the first documented flute and recorder maker, Michaud Ruffin. It was a family business, and those flutes are some of the first Western-type flutes that we still have in existence today. The surviving flutes from the 1500s aren't on display, and access to them is reserved for the keenest of researchers. The French King Charles VIII established his own fifers and drummers, who were actually Swiss and German, in 1516. He also, in the previous century, had employed transverse flutists for his wedding and other ceremonies. In the 16th century, the flute starts to be thought of as something French. French flutists held post in many other European courts. And that concludes our entry into the 16th century. We will discuss the rest of the century in the next video.